Hey, this is Paranormal Girl. Of all the strange UFO encounters and UFO abductions, this one I'm about to tell you has to be the strangest one of all. It's the very famous Betty Andreasson encounter. The date is January 25th, 1967, and the place was South Ashburnham. One night in the city, one of the most celebrated cases of UFO abductions began. Betty Andreasson was working in her kitchen while her 7 children, mother and father, were in the living room. Shortly after 6:30 p.m, the lights in the house briefly blinked. Immediately thereafter, a reddish light began to beam through the kitchen window. The sudden darkness in the house set the kids' nerves on edge. Betty ran to comfort them. Her father ran into the kitchen to peer out of the window and find the source of the unusual light. In his utter shock, he saw 5 odd-looking beings coming toward the house with a hopping motion. Before he could regain his composure, he saw the beings walk right through the wooden door. What happened next would test the imagination and strength of even an open-minded, adventurous person. The entire family was suddenly put into a state of suspended animation. One of the creatures went to Betty's father, while one of the other 4 began to make telepathic communications with Betty. One of the group seemed to be a leader of sorts. He was about 5 foot tall. The other 4 appeared to be about 4 foot tall. All the beings had a pear-shaped head, with wide eyes and small ears and noses. Their mouths were only slits and never moved, though they were able to communicate through their minds. The beings wore a type of coverall, blue in colour with a wide belt. There was also a logo of a bird on their sleeves. Their hands had only 3 fingers, and they also wore boots. The creatures did not move as a human, but floated as they went. Betty would later relate that though she was frightened, she felt a sense of calm, even friendship toward the beings. The aliens were holding her children in a frozen state of consciousness, but when Betty showed concern for them, the aliens released her 11-year-old daughter to assure her the children were not being harmed. Betty was taken by the aliens outside to a waiting craft, which rested on the side of a sloping backyard. The craft was estimated to be about 20 feet in diameter, in the classic saucer shape. Betty believes that after she was aboard the craft, it joined a mother craft, where she underwent a physical examination and was also subjected to the effects of strange equipment. After this, she was given a type of bizarre test, which caused her pain at first, but resulted in a kind of religious experience. Approximately 4 hours later, she was returned to her home by 2 of her captors. When she arrived, her entire family was still in a state of a suspended animation. One of the beings had stayed in her house, evidently to watch the other family members. After releasing the family from the trance-like state, the aliens left. She would later state that the aliens had hypnotized her not to recall any of her experience until a designated time to be determined later. She was able to recall only certain things at the time of her experience. The power outage, the red light through the kitchen window, and the aliens entering the house. Before this bizarre happening, Betty had little or no knowledge or interest of UFO folklore. And being a devoted Christian, she believed that the abduction had a religious meaning. It would be later until she began to view the abduction as alien in nature. 8 years later, Betty answered an ad from Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who is soliciting abduction experiences from the general public. Her letter was dismissed at the time because of its unusual detail, and it would be January 1977 before her story would be finally investigated. The investigative team assigned to the Andreasson case included a solar physicist, an electronics engineer, an aerospace engineer, a telecommunications specialist, and a UFO investigator. The services of a hypnotist, a doctor trained in psychiatry were also used. Betty's case involved 12 months of investigation. She was given a character reference check, 2 lie detector tests, a psychiatric review, and an excruciating 14 sessions of regressive hypnosis. The results of this inquiry were startling. Betty, along with her daughter, relived a detailed account of a UFO experience, agreeing on all basic aspects. The results were published in a 528-page account which stated that Betty and her daughter were sane individuals who sincerely believe all the details given in their statements. The Betty Andreasson abduction case is still being investigated today. We also have an update. This abduction case is among the more complex of such reports. Although the original encounter took place on January 25th, 1967, the UFO investigation community first learned about this through a letter from Andreasson to Dr. J. Allen Hynek, dated August 20th, 1975. Hynek subsequently forwarded her letter to the Humanoid Study Group, which had several prominent members in Massachusetts. Raymond Fowler and his colleagues then began a follow-up investigation during January 1977. Betty and her parents were living in South Ashburnham in Massachusetts, while her husband James was in hospital recovering from severe injuries suffered by an automobile accident. They had 7 children aged 3 to 11. Early on the foggy evening of January 25th, 1967, the house lights began flickering and then went out. Some creatures were seen out of the kitchen window approaching the house. Betty's next conscious memory was of waking up the following morning with a feeling that something extraordinary had happened. In the ensuing months and years, she occasionally had flashback memories of humanoid beings and an unearthly environment. Under regressive hypnosis during 1977, Betty reported that her parents and children all were paralyzed or frozen in place as 5 humanoid beings about 4 foot tall with grey skin, oversized head, and large slanted eyes entered the house through the closed door. They communicated with her telepathically and invited her to go with them. Following their instructions, she stood directly behind the leader, and she and the beings in a row were transported or swooped through the closed door and floated to a landed, disc-shaped craft in the backyard. On board the craft, Andreasson was subjected to various medical procedures. Then she was moved to another room. She had tubes inserted into her mouth, was immersed in a grey liquid, and felt motions as if she were being transported to somewhere else. She found herself in a strange, otherworldly environment inhabited by non-human creatures. She saw a crystalline city with buildings and a 15-foot-tall bird-like apparition that appeared to be a living creature. The bird burst into flames and was reduced to a pile of ashes. The humanoid beings continued to communicate with her, but their messages were incoherent, and she had no idea what they wanted or what they intended for her. However, she had interpreted the beings in terms of her fundamentalist Christian beliefs as angels or messengers of God, and a voice that spoke to her as God. Eventually, she was taken back through the same place and observed many of the same things on the return trip to her home. When she re-entered the house, she found her family members still frozen like statues. They were all escorted to their bedrooms, and the primary episode, the conscious memory part of it, was concluded. Further hypnotic regression over a period of time brought forth recollections of lifelong interactions with extraterrestrial beings. In the fall of 1945, she saw a circular object land and felt paralysed. She found herself in a white room with 3 small beings with light globes placed around her. Then, in another room with 5-foot-tall beings. There, she experienced flashing lights and a spinning motion, and the craft plunged into a body of water and then rose above it. Following that, she was inside an icy cave and encountered other human beings, motionless, animals, and dish-shaped machines. Other environments and encounters and devices too numerous to mention were experienced after that. On September the 21st, 1961, 5 days before the Barney and Betty Hill abduction, Andreasson had a time-lapse experience, and later under hypnosis recalled a tall, grey humanoid giving her a religious-like message. The being told her she had a role to play in bringing others to salvation, and warned her evil beings sought to harm the human race. So my question to you, do you actually believe her? Or do you think she was making it up? Or did it actually really happen? And there was a message that they needed to tell us. I'm quite interested about this icy cave. Do you suppose that's deep in the Antarctic maybe? Leave a comment in the section below. I'd be very interested in your thoughts on this story. Thank you for listening.